My name is Ellis, and I'm 34 years old. When my sister Stephanie got her acceptance letter to Franklin University, I was the one who promised to help fund her education. Today was supposed to be the proudest day of our lives as I watched her graduate with honors. I had this weird feeling, though, like something was off. Mom kept giving me these side glances all morning. If only I knew what was coming. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if family drama hits close to home, and stick around because this graduation day changed everything. Growing up in our household of 4 wasn't exactly what you'd call easy. Dad worked construction, putting in 60-hour weeks just to keep a roof over our heads in suburban Milwaukee. Mom taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school, which meant she brought her teacher mindset home with her. Report cards weren't just reports in our house. They were like the family scoreboard. From as early as I can remember, there was this unspoken expectation that I would excel academically. Problem was, school and I never quite clicked. Words jumped around on pages, my mind wandered during lectures, and I could never seem to organize my thoughts the way other kids did. Years later, a therapist would tell me I had ADHD, but back then, I was just labeled as lazy, unmotivated, or worst of all, not trying hard enough. Stephanie came along when I was 4, and it became clear pretty quickly that she had gotten whatever academic genes had skipped over me. By 2nd grade, she was reading at a 5th grade level. By middle school, she was acing advanced placement tests and getting invited to academic competitions. Mom would beam with pride, plastering Stephanie's certificates and awards all over our refrigerator, while my mediocre report cards were met with sighs and lectures about applying myself. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my adolescence. Every parent-teacher conference ended the same way, with Mom looking disappointed and Dad staying silent, too exhausted from work to intervene. I remember one particular night when I'd studied for weeks, for a math exam, only to bring home a C+. Mom took one look at it and said, "Stephanie got an A+ on this same test last year, and she didn't even need to study." Those words cut deeper than she knew. By 16, I'd started working at a local computer repair shop after school, partly because we needed the money. Dad's back was giving him problems and the medical bills were piling up, but mostly because I wanted a place where I wasn't constantly being compared to my sister. The shop owner, Frank, became something of a mentor to me. He didn't care that I struggled with algebra. He cared that I could diagnose a faulty motherboard faster than anyone he'd ever seen. "You've got a mind for systems," he told me once. Not the systems they teach in schools, but the ones that actually make the world work. It was the first genuine compliment about my intelligence that I could remember receiving. High school graduation came and went without much fanfare. I managed to pull off a 2.7 GPA, not impressive by any standard, but enough to get my diploma. Stephanie, only a freshman then, was already taking senior-level classes and being courted by college recruiters. At my graduation dinner, Mom spent most of the time telling relatives about Stephanie's recent science fair win, rather than acknowledging my milestone. While my classmates headed off to college, I decided to go a different route. I took the $5,000 I'd saved from my job and invested in some equipment to start my own computer repair business. Dad thought I was being foolish. Mom just seemed relieved. I wasn't trying to go to college and waste money we don't have on something you're not cut out for. Those first few years were brutal. I worked out of our garage until Dad's health forced us to move to a smaller house without one. Then I worked from a tiny rented office above a laundromat. I taught myself coding at night through free online courses, learning through trial and error. While friends from high school were posting pictures of their college parties, I was pulling all-nighters trying to fix client emergencies or learn new programming languages. Slowly but surely, my business evolved from simple repairs to custom software solutions for small businesses. I discovered I had a knack for understanding what clients needed before they even knew themselves. My ADHD brain, which had been such a liability in school, turned out to be an asset in entrepreneurship. I could hyper-focus on problems for hours, see connections others missed, and think outside conventional boundaries. As Stephanie approached her high school graduation, it became clear she was destined for academic greatness. She was valedictorian, of course, and had been accepted to several prestigious universities. The scholarships started rolling in, but even with them, there would be a significant gap in what our family could afford. Dad's health had deteriorated further, and Mom's teaching salary barely covered our basic expenses. I'll never forget the night Stephanie sat at our kitchen table, surrounded by acceptance letters but with a look of defeat on her face. "Maybe I'll just go to community college for 2 years," she said, trying to sound positive but not quite hiding her disappointment. That night, I made a decision that would set the course for the next few years of all our lives. I had just landed my biggest client contract yet, a 3-year deal that would finally put my business on solid ground. Without telling anyone in my family the extent of my financial situation, I promised Stephanie I would help cover the costs that her scholarships didn't. Mom assumed I was just contributing a small amount from my little business, as she called it. She had no idea that I was committing to over $70,000 over 4 years. "Don't worry about paying me back," I told Stephanie. "Just make it count." And she did. While I continued building my company, Stephanie thrived at Franklin University, calling occasionally to share her successes or vent about challenging professors. Mom would forward me Stephanie's Dean's List certificates via email, usually with subject lines like, "Look what your sister accomplished." Never once did she ask how my business was doing, except to confirm I could still help with Stephanie's expenses. The thing about being underestimated your whole life is that it either breaks you or it becomes your greatest motivation. For me, it was definitely the latter. Every time someone doubted my business would survive, every dismissive comment from Mom about my computer hobby, every comparison to Stephanie's academic achievements, they all became fuel for the fire that drove me forward. My first big break came 3 years into running my company. A client referred me to a regional bank that needed a custom inventory management system. The existing solutions were too expensive and too generic for their specific needs. I spent 2 months developing a streamlined system that integrated with their current infrastructure. When I delivered it, on time and under budget, the vice president was so impressed that he recommended me to several other businesses in his network. Suddenly, I was hiring my first employees, 2 programmers and an administrative assistant. We moved from my tiny office to a legitimate commercial space. Revenue doubled, then tripled. I reinvested almost everything back into the business, living in a modest apartment and driving the same used car I'd had since high school. My personal expenses stayed low, but my company's reputation soared. By the time I hit 30, I had 28 employees and a client list that included businesses across 3 states. We had expanded from custom software into comprehensive IT solutions, with recurring revenue from maintenance contracts that stabilized our cash flow. I wasn't a millionaire, but I was doing better financially than anyone in my family had ever dreamed possible, not that they knew it. Dad's health took a sharp decline about 5 years ago. Years of physical labor had worn his body down, and his heart wasn't keeping up. The medical bills piled higher than the mortgage. I started sending money home every month, quietly paying off their debts through an account I set up in Dad's name so Mom wouldn't know it was coming from me. I didn't want her gratitude, mostly because I doubted I'd get it. 3 years ago, Dad passed away from a massive heart attack. At the funeral, I learned he had confided in Stephanie about the financial help I'd been providing. "He was so proud of you," she whispered to me at the reception. "He told me you were the strongest person he knew." Those words meant more to me than any business success I'd achieved. After Dad died, Mom was left with even more debt than I'd realized. There was a second mortgage I hadn't known about, credit card bills that had ballooned to 5 figures, and the remaining medical expenses that insurance hadn't covered. Without telling Mom, I paid it all off. She assumed it was life insurance money, and I never corrected her. What would have been the point? In her eyes, I was still just Ellis, the underachiever who had barely graduated high school. Meanwhile, Stephanie continued to excel at Franklin University. She was double majoring in biochemistry and economics, maintaining a near-perfect GPA, and already getting offers for prestigious graduate programs. I was genuinely happy for her. She had worked hard and deserved every accolade she received. Then came the call during her final year. Stephanie's voice was shaking as she explained that one of her major scholarships had been cut due to university budget constraints. She was facing a shortfall of nearly $20,000 for her final 2 semesters. "I can defer for a year and work," she suggested, though I could hear the heartbreak in her voice. She was so close to finishing. "Absolutely not," I said. "I've got it covered." "Ellis, that's too much. You've already done so much." It's an investment in your future, I assured her. Besides, the business is doing well. That was an understatement. We had just landed our biggest contract yet with a national retail chain. I set up what I called the Stephanie Fund, $70,000 to cover her final year, plus enough for graduate school applications and expenses until she could secure funding for her PhD program. Mom somehow found out about this fund, but seemed to assume it was a modest amount, a few thousand at most. She thanked me briefly during our monthly phone call, then immediately pivoted to telling me about Stephanie's latest academic paper being published in some prestigious journal. These conversations with Mom followed a predictable pattern. Brief questions about my life that she didn't really listen to the answers for, detailed updates about Stephanie's achievements, and inevitably, some reference to my academic shortcomings. "It's such a shame you didn't apply yourself in school like your sister," she'd say. Or, "Imagine what you could have accomplished if you'd had Stephanie's work ethic." Each comment was a paper cut, minor in isolation but agonizing in their accumulation. Still, I continued supporting both of them financially. I paid off Mom's house so she could retire comfortably. I funded Stephanie's education and helped her with living expenses. I did it because they were family, because Dad would have wanted me to, and because somewhere deep down, I still harbored this childish hope that someday Mom would look at me with the same pride she reserved for Stephanie. In the weeks leading up to Stephanie's graduation, Mom called me more frequently than she had in years. Not to check on me, but to coordinate graduation plans. There would be a ceremony followed by a reception at Mom's house, which she was having catered with money I'd sent her for household expenses. I arranged to take 3 days off work, no small feat given our current project timeline, and booked a hotel near Mom's house, declining her half-hearted offer to stay in my old room, which had long since been converted into a home office. The night before I left for the graduation, I stayed late at my office, finalizing some client deliverables. As I sat at my desk, the large corner office with a view of downtown, I found myself wondering what Dad would think if he could see me now. Would he be proud? Would he finally understand that there are different kinds of intelligence, different paths to success? I like to think he would. With those thoughts swirling in my mind, I packed up my laptop, grabbed the wrapped laptop I'd bought as Stephanie's graduation gift, and headed home to prepare for what I thought would be a weekend of celebration. I had no idea I was driving straight into a storm that had been brewing for decades. The 3-hour drive to my hometown gave me plenty of time to rehearse the version of myself I'd present to the family and friends gathered for Stephanie's graduation. I'd downplay my business success, ask lots of questions about other people's lives, and make sure not to do anything that might detract from Stephanie's moment. This routine was second nature to me by now, become smaller, less significant, just background noise in the symphony of Stephanie's achievements. I arrived at Mom's house around 11 in the morning on the day of the party. The ceremony had been held the previous day, which I'd missed due to a critical client meeting I couldn't reschedule. Mom had understood, or at least she'd claimed to, but I detected the familiar note of disappointment in her voice. Stephanie understood, she'd said, which was code for Stephanie would never have prioritized work over family. The modest suburban house where I'd grown up was transformed. Balloons in Franklin University's colors adorned the mailbox and front door. A professionally printed banner reading, "Congratulations, graduate," stretched across the front porch. Inside, catering staff bustled about setting up serving stations in the living room and dining room. A bar had been set up on the back patio, complete with a bartender mixing specialty cocktails named after Stephanie's academic achievements. I found Mom in the kitchen, supervising the arrangement of a massive cake decorated with an edible replica of Stephanie's diploma. She looked up when I entered, giving me a quick once-over. "You made it," she said, her tone suggesting she'd had her doubts. "Stephanie will be down soon. She's getting ready." "The place looks amazing, Mom," I said, setting Stephanie's gift on the designated table, already piled high with presents. "Well, it's not every day your daughter graduates summa cum laude from Franklin University," she replied, emphasizing the Latin honors in a way that felt pointed. "The Montgomery family is coming. You remember Thomas Montgomery? He's a surgeon now. And the Wilsons, their daughter Julia, is in law school at Harvard." I nodded, recognizing the familiar pattern. Mom had always enjoyed parading Stephanie's academic peers in front of me, as if to underline what I could have been if I'd just applied myself. "How's the business?" she asked. the obligatory question she always posed, without actually wanting details. "It's good," I replied with my standard brevity, growing steadily. "That's nice, dear." She patted my arm distractedly before turning back to the cake. "Oh, and please try not to mention that video game company you work with. The Hendersons are very opposed to video games, and I don't want anything controversial today." I bit back the correction that we didn't work with a video game company but rather provided enterprise-level security solutions for one of the largest gaming platforms in the world, a contract worth 7 figures annually. Instead, I just nodded and excused myself to get a drink from the bar. The guests began arriving around noon. Distant relatives, family friends, Mom's colleagues from school, and Stephanie's university friends filled the house and spilled out onto the back patio. I positioned myself near the edge of the crowd, nursing a whiskey and observing the social dynamics that hadn't changed since high school. Aunt Lydia found me first, squinting at me through her thick glasses. "Ellis, is that you? My goodness, you've grown up." She said this as if she was surprised I hadn't remained frozen as the 16-year-old she remembered. "Hi, Aunt Lydia. How are you?" "Oh, the arthritis is acting up. But never mind that. What are you doing with yourself these days? Still fixing computers?" I gave her the abbreviated version of my career, which she listened to with the polite disinterest of someone waiting for their turn to speak. "Well, that's nice," she said when I finished. "Your sister is really something special, isn't she? Your mother says she's already been accepted to 3 PhD programs, with full funding." She emphasized this last point as if to suggest it was particularly impressive that Stephanie hadn't needed financial help, blissfully unaware that my Stephanie Fund had covered the application fees, travel for campus visits, and would continue supporting her until those funding packages kicked in. I was saved from responding by the arrival of Stephanie herself, making a grand entrance down the staircase. She looked radiant in a blue dress that matched her graduation robes, her hair styled in elegant waves. A genuine smile broke across my face. Whatever complicated feelings I had about Mom and our family dynamics, I was truly proud of my sister. Stephanie spotted me immediately and broke away from the admiring crowd to throw her arms around me. "You made it. I wasn't sure if you could get away from work." "Wouldn't have missed it," I said, returning her hug. "Congratulations, Steph. You earned this." "Thanks for the flowers yesterday," she said. "They were beautiful. Sorry I couldn't be there for the actual ceremony." She waved away my apology. Mom recorded the whole thing. Besides, this is the fun part anyway. Before we could continue our conversation, Mom appeared at Stephanie's elbow. "Darling, the Prestons just arrived. You remember Dean Preston from the Alumni Association? He specifically asked to congratulate you." Stephanie gave me an apologetic look as Mom steered her away. "We'll catch up later," she called over her shoulder. The next hour passed in a blur of small talk and awkward reunions. I met Stephanie's boyfriend Troy, a finance major with perfect teeth and a firm handshake who kept referring to his connections at Goldman Sachs. I chatted with Mom's teaching colleagues, who remembered me as Stephanie's brother rather than by my name. I overheard snippets of conversations about Stephanie's brilliance, her promising future, her remarkable achievements. Throughout it all, I maintained my pleasant expression, deflected questions about my own life, and kept my whiskey glass full. I was playing my assigned role in the family narrative perfectly, the unremarkable older brother who served as a contrast to highlight Stephanie's exceptionalism. Around 2 o'clock, Mom clinked her glass for everyone's attention. The catering staff had finished setting up the buffet, and it was time for speeches before the meal. My stomach nodded with apprehension. I had a feeling I knew what was coming, but I silently prayed I was wrong. The room gradually fell silent as everyone turned their attention to Mom, who stood by the fireplace looking every inch the proud parent in her carefully selected outfit and freshly styled hair. She held a champagne flute in one hand and a small microphone in the other. She had actually rented a sound system for this party, something she'd never done for any event in my memory. "Thank you all so much for coming today," she began, her teacher voice projecting clearly through the room. "Today is such a special day for our family as we celebrate Stephanie's graduation from Franklin University." A round of applause broke out, and Stephanie smiled modestly from her place of honor on the living room sofa. "As many of you know, Stephanie has always been exceptional," Mom continued. "From her first steps, which she took at just 9 months old, to her first words, which were actually a complete sentence, She has consistently amazed us. I took a larger sip of my whiskey, recognizing the start of Mom's standard Stephanie is exceptional speech that I'd heard at birthdays, holidays, and family gatherings for as long as I could remember. Throughout school, Stephanie has maintained perfect grades while also participating in numerous extracurricular activities. She was president of the science club, captain of the debate team, and still found time to volunteer 20 hours a month at the children's hospital. Another round of approving murmurs rippled through the crowd. I noticed a few glances in my direction and maintained my neutral smile. And now, she graduates summa cum laude with a double major in biochemistry and economics, with offers from 3 prestigious PhD programs. Mom's voice swelled with emotion. She is, without question, the pride of this family. That stung, but it wasn't unexpected. I'd heard variations of this statement my entire life. I took another sip of whiskey and prepared for the speech to wrap up. But Mom wasn't finished. She turned slightly, making direct eye contact with me for the first time since I'd arrived. Not like her brother, who barely passed high school. The room fell uncomfortably quiet for a beat before nervous laughter broke out. Mom smiled, clearly believing she'd made a harmless joke. Stephanie's eyes widened in horror, and she made a small movement as if to stand up and interrupt, but she seemed frozen in place. Mom continued, apparently oblivious to the sudden tension. Ellis was always more interested in taking apart computers than studying. We used to worry about how he'd ever support himself. More laughter, louder this time, emboldening her. Who would have thought his little repair business would actually keep him afloat, though I still think he would have benefited from college like his sister. Each word felt like a physical blow. I stood perfectly still, my face burning with a mixture of humiliation and anger. 20 years of similar comments had conditioned me to take it silently, to be the good sport, to laugh along with everyone else at my own expense. But something was different today. Maybe it was the public nature of the humiliation, or the contrast between how I was portrayed and the reality of my life. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of every dismissive comment, every comparison, every time my achievements had been minimized or ignored. Or maybe it was simply that, at 34, I was finally tired of playing my assigned role in the family story. Mom raised her glass high. To Stephanie, the scholar, the achiever, the pride of our family. We can't wait to see what amazing things you'll accomplish next. Everyone raised their glasses. I did too, mechanically, my mind oddly calm despite the storm of emotions inside me. And now, Mom said, Stephanie will say a few words, and then we can enjoy this wonderful meal. I don't know exactly what came over me in that moment. There was no conscious decision, just a sudden clarity that I wouldn't let this continue. Before Stephanie could rise from her seat, I found myself standing, my own glass raised. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the murmuring crowd, I'd like to say something first. Mom looked startled, then vaguely annoyed at the deviation from her planned program. But social convention prevented her from shutting me down in front of all these guests. You're right, Mom, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm not the pride of this family. I'm the paycheck. A confused silence fell over the room. Mom's smile froze on her face. I turned to face Stephanie directly. Congratulations on your graduation, Steph. You worked hard and you deserve every accolade. But there's something you should know. I paused, meeting her increasingly concerned gaze. That $70,000 scholarship fund for your final year in graduate school? Consider it closed. The room went completely silent. I could almost hear the collective intake of breath. Stephanie's face drained of color, and Mom's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Ellis, Stephanie finally managed, her voice barely audible. What are you talking about? Ask Mom, I replied, setting my glass down carefully on the nearest table. She knows exactly what I'm talking about, even if she prefers to pretend my little repair business couldn't possibly generate that kind of money. Mom found her voice at last. Ellis, this is hardly the time or place. When would be a better time, Mom? When I'm writing another check? When I'm paying off another one of your debts? When I'm funding another one of Stephanie's achievements that you can brag about to your friends? The horrified expressions around the room should have made me stop, but years of suppressed feelings were finally breaking through the dam I'd built. Did you know, I said, addressing the room at large but looking directly at Mom, that I've been running a successful software company for the past decade, that I employ 30 people, that I paid off Dad's medical bills and the second mortgage, And every other debt this family had after he died? My voice cracked slightly on the mention of Dad, but I pushed through. No, of course you didn't. Because in this family, unless you have a fancy degree and Latin honors, your achievements don't count. I picked up my suit jacket from where I'd draped it over a chair. I'm not doing this anymore. Congratulations on your graduation, Stephanie. I truly mean that. Mom, enjoy your party. I'm sure you can find plenty to talk about without mentioning your disappointment of a son. With that, I turned and walked toward the front door, aware of the stunned silence behind me. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard Stephanie call my name, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. If I saw her hurt expression, I might cave in, might apologize, might slip back into the role I'd played for so long. Instead, I walked out, got into my car, and drove away from the house where I'd never quite been good enough, from the mother who'd never seen me clearly, and from the life where I'd been valued only for what I could provide, not for who I was. The irony wasn't lost on me. For once, I'd actually become the center of attention at a family gathering, but not in the way anyone, least of all myself, would have wanted. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and my mind replayed the scene at the party in an excruciating loop. Had I really just done that? Had I actually blown up 20 years of carefully maintained family peace in the span of 2 minutes? By the time I pulled into my parking space, my phone had vibrated so many times it had nearly vibrated itself off the passenger seat. I picked it up and saw 17 missed calls and 23 text messages, most from Stephanie, a few from Mom, and surprisingly, some from relatives and even Stephanie's boyfriend Troy. I ignored them all, walked into my apartment, and poured myself a generous glass of bourbon. The silence of my living room felt both comforting and accusatory. I decorated the place minimally: clean lines, functional furniture, a few abstract paintings I'd purchased from a client who ran a gallery. No family photos adorned my walls or shelves. I'd told myself it was an aesthetic choice, but standing there now, I wondered if it had been a subconscious acknowledgement of my peripheral role in the family narrative. The phone vibrated again. Stephanie. Again. I let it go to voicemail, then immediately felt guilty. This wasn't her fault. She'd never asked to be the golden child, had never participated in the comparisons Mom constantly drew between us. If anything, she'd tried to deflect attention from my perceived shortcomings over the years. When the phone rang for the 20th time, I finally answered. Ellis? Oh my God. Ellis, are you okay? Stephanie's voice was thick with tears. I'm fine, I replied, though fine was possibly the least accurate description of how I felt. I'm so sorry, she said, her words tumbling out rapidly. I had no idea about the money, about what you've been doing for us. Mom never told me. I thought my scholarships covered everything, and that you were just helping with small expenses. Why didn't you tell me? I sank onto my sofa, suddenly exhausted. Would it have mattered? Of course it would have mattered. Ellis, you've been supporting me through college, and I didn't even know to thank you properly. I didn't do it for thanks, I said quietly. Then why did you do it? The question caught me off guard. Why had I done it? Because you're my sister. Because you deserved the opportunity. Because Dad would have wanted me to. But all this time, Mom has been. She trailed off, seemingly unable to put into words what we both knew. Yeah, I said simply. She's devastated, Ellis. After you left, she just sat down and couldn't stop crying. A complicated mix of emotions surged through me. Vindication, guilt, anger, sadness. I'm not sure what you want me to say to that, Steph. She didn't mean to hurt you, Stephanie said, though her tone suggested she knew how weak that defense sounded. I think she just doesn't understand what you've accomplished because it's so different from her world. She's had 10 years to try to understand, I replied, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. 10 years of me sending money, paying bills, funding your education. Did she ever once ask me about my company? Did she ever show any interest in what I actually do? Did she ever stop introducing me as her son, who fixes computers like I'm running some kind of repair stand at a flea market? Stephanie was silent for a long moment. No, she finally admitted, she didn't. And I didn't push her to, either. I'm sorry, Ellis. I should have seen what was happening. Her genuine remorse deflated some of my anger. It's not your job to manage Mom's behavior, Steph, but I benefited from it, didn't I? I got the praise, the support, the pride, while you got. She didn't finish the sentence. Look, I'm not mad at you, I assured her. And I didn't mean what I said about closing your fund. That money is yours. It's already set aside. I couldn't take it anymore, being the family ATM while also being the family disappointment. I understand, she said softly. And thank you, but I don't think I can accept any more money from you, Ellis. Not after learning all this. We can talk about that later, I said, not wanting to get into another emotional discussion. Right now, I just need some space. From everything. Especially from Mom. She wants to talk to you. I'm sure she does, I said dryly. But I'm not ready for that conversation. Stephanie didn't push it. I love you, Ellis, and I'm proud of you. Not just for your success, but for who you are as a person. I should have said that a long time ago. Those simple words, I'm proud of you, hit me harder than I expected. I had to clear my throat before I could respond. Thanks, Steph. That means a lot. I love you too. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, thinking about everything and nothing. Part of me regretted causing a scene at Stephanie's graduation party. Another part felt like I'd finally broken free from a role that had been suffocating me for decades. 2 days later, I was sitting at my desk reviewing quarterly projections when my assistant, Rachel, buzzed me on the intercom. Ellis, there's a woman here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says she's your mother. My heart rate immediately spiked. I considered having Rachel tell her I was in a meeting, or out of the office entirely. But I knew this confrontation was inevitable. Send her in, I said, quickly closing the financial documents on my computer screen. Mom entered my office hesitantly, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the space. The large desk, the wall of windows overlooking the city, the awards and client recognition plaques I'd accumulated over the years. She looked smaller somehow, less formidable than the woman who had loomed so large in my childhood. This is quite impressive, Ellis, she said, gesturing vaguely around the office. Thank you, I replied neutrally, not rising from my chair. Please, sit down. She perched on one of the chairs facing my desk, her purse clutched tightly on her lap. I wanted to talk to you about what happened at the party. I assumed as much. She pressed her lips together, clearly finding my cool demeanor unsettling. I think you misunderstood what I was trying to say. Of all the ways I'd imagined this conversation starting, this wasn't one of them. Did I? Enlighten me. The joke about you barely passing high school, it wasn't meant to be hurtful. It was just a little family teasing. Was it? I leaned forward slightly, because from where I'm sitting it sounded like the same thing you've been saying to me and about me for the past 20 years. You're being overly sensitive, she said, a flash of the more familiar, disapproving Mom showing through. It was a celebration for Stephanie. Everything doesn't always have to be about you. That's rich, coming from you, I said with a short, humorless laugh. When has anything ever been about me, Mom? When have you ever celebrated my accomplishments with the same enthusiasm you've shown for Stephanie's? That's not fair. We've always supported you. No, I interrupted, surprising us both with the firmness in my voice. You haven't, Dad tried, in his own way. But you? You've spent my entire life making it clear that I wasn't meeting your expectations, that I wasn't smart enough, or driven enough, or accomplished enough to make you proud. That's not true, she protested, but her eyes slid away from mine. Isn't it? When I started my company, you called it my hobby. When I landed my first major client, you changed the subject to Stephanie's internship. When I bought my first commercial property, you didn't even acknowledge it. Do you have any idea what my company actually does? How many people I employ? What our annual revenue is? Her silence was answer enough. And yet, I continued, I've paid off your mortgage. I've covered Dad's medical bills. I've funded Stephanie's education. I've made sure you could retire comfortably. And all while you continued to introduce me as your son who never quite found his way academically. Mom's eyes had filled with tears, but I wasn't sure if they were from genuine remorse or from being confronted so directly. I didn't know about all the financial support, she said quietly. I thought most of it came from Dad's life insurance and Stephanie's scholarships. Because that's what you wanted to believe, I replied. It was easier than acknowledging that your underachieving son might actually be successful in his own way. She looked down at her hands. I may have been narrow-minded about what constitutes success. It was as close to an admission of fault as I'd ever heard from her. "I'm sorry if I hurt you, Ellis," she added, meeting my gaze again. "But you hurt me too, embarrassing me in front of everyone like that, and you ruined Stephanie's special day." And there it was, the pivot back to how I had wronged her and Stephanie, rather than a genuine acknowledgement of decades of dismissive behavior. Some things never changed. "I think we're done here, Mom," I said, standing up. "I have a meeting in 5 minutes." "Ellis, please." "I'm not cutting you off financially," I assured her, correctly guessing her next concern. "And I'm not backing out of my commitments to Stephanie. But I need some time and space from this relationship. I need to figure out who I am outside of the role you've assigned me in the family." She stood shakily, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "Will you at least come to Sunday dinner next week? We can talk more then. Try to work through this." "Not next week," I said firmly. "I'll call you when I'm ready." As I showed her out, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The confrontation hadn't gone exactly as I'd imagined. There had been no grand apology, no sudden realization on her part of all the ways she'd hurt me over the years. But I had finally spoken my truth, had finally stepped out of the shadow I'd been living in for as long as I could remember. And that, I decided, was progress. A month passed without contact from Mom, though Stephanie called regularly to check in. She'd started interviewing for research positions, wanting to gain some practical experience before committing to a PhD program. I could hear in her voice a new awareness, a sensitivity to how she spoke about her achievements around me. Part of me wanted to tell her she didn't need to walk on eggshells, but another part appreciated the effort she was making to understand my perspective. "Mom asks about you," she mentioned during one call. "She's trying, Ellis, in her own way." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, swiveling in my office chair to look out at the cityscape below. It was a clear day, the kind that made the buildings shine like they were made of something more precious than glass and steel. "She's been reading about ADHD," Stephanie said, "and about different types of intelligence. She even joined a parent support group at the community center." That surprised me. Mom had always been dismissive of labels like ADHD, viewing them as excuses rather than legitimate neurological differences. "That's unexpected," I admitted. "She misses you," Stephanie continued. "We all had dinner at her house last weekend. Me, Troy, Uncle George, and Aunt Diana. And she kept looking at the empty chair like she was expecting you to show up." "I'm not ready for that," I said, my chest tightening at the thought of another family gathering. "I know, and I've told her that. Just don't write her off completely, okay?" After we hung up, I found myself thinking about family and forgiveness more than I had in years. Was I being too harsh, too unforgiving? Or was I finally establishing healthy boundaries after decades of emotional neglect? I didn't have answers, but I knew I needed help sorting through these questions. The following day, I contacted a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and adult ADHD. Dr. Harrison had an easy manner that made me comfortable almost immediately, and she didn't seem fazed when I laid out the whole messy situation in our first session. "What you're describing is quite common in families where one child is neurodivergent and another is neurotypical," she explained. "Parents, especially those from older generations, often don't understand conditions like ADHD and interpret the symptoms as character flaws or lack of effort. I've been successful despite it," I pointed out. "Not despite it," she corrected gently. "Your ADHD brain likely contributed significantly to your entrepreneurial success. The hyperfocus, the creative problem-solving, the ability to see connections others miss, these can be tremendous assets in the right context." Over the next several weeks, our sessions helped me understand not just my own psychology, but also the family dynamics that had shaped me. I began to see how Mom's identity had become wrapped up in academic achievement, both her own as a teacher and vicariously through Stephanie. I recognized how Dad's silence had been its own form of emotional absence, even as he'd tried to support me in practical ways. Most importantly, I started to disentangle my self-worth from external validation, particularly from Mom's approval, which I'd been unconsciously seeking my entire life. "You can't control how others perceive you," Dr. Harrison reminded me during one particularly difficult session. "But you can control how much power you give their perceptions over your own sense of self." While I was working through these revelations in therapy, Stephanie was going through her own process of discovery. She'd taken a research assistant position at a biotech firm and was experiencing the corporate world for the first time, complete with office politics, deadline pressures, and the relentless grind of full-time work. "I had no idea it was this hard," she confessed when we met for dinner 6 weeks after the graduation party incident. "School was demanding, but in a different way. This is just relentless." "Welcome to adulthood," I said with a small smile, not unkindly. "Is this what it's been like for you all these years? Building your business while also supporting us financially?" I shrugged. "It's all I've known." She shook her head, looking at me with new appreciation. "Ellis, I don't think I've ever properly understood what you've accomplished. Not just the business success, but the resilience it took to get there without the support system I had." Her words warmed something long cold inside me. "Thanks, Steph. That means a lot." "Mom's planning a small dinner next Sunday," she said after a pause. "Just the 3 of us. She wants to try to talk things through. Would you consider coming?" My instinct was to refuse immediately, but Dr. Harrison had been encouraging me to engage with the conflict rather than avoid it, as long as I maintained clear boundaries. "I'll think about it," I said, which was more openness than I'd shown in months. To my own surprise, I found myself pulling into Mom's driveway the following Sunday evening. I sat in my car for several minutes, rehearsing what I wanted to say and reminding myself of the boundaries I'd established with Dr. Harrison. I wouldn't let Mom minimize my feelings. I wouldn't accept superficial apologies. And I wouldn't fall back into old patterns of seeking her approval. The dinner began awkwardly, with Stephanie carrying most of the conversation while Mom and I exchanged cautious pleasantries. We made it through the main course. Mom had prepared my favorite lasagna, a peace offering I recognized but didn't acknowledge, before the real conversation began. "Ellis," Mom said, setting down her fork with deliberate care, "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the graduation party." "So have I replied neutrally. "I've realized that I may not have been as supportive of you as I should have been." She paused, seeming to struggle with her words. "I had very specific ideas about success, about what it looked like, about how to achieve it. And when you didn't follow that path, I didn't know how to adjust my expectations." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was more self-awareness than I'd ever heard from her. "I didn't understand your ADHD," she continued. "I thought you were just being difficult, or lazy. I didn't see how hard you were trying in your own way." "You never asked," I said quietly. "You never tried to understand." She nodded, accepting the criticism. "You're right. I was so focused on pushing you toward what I thought was best that I never stopped to consider what actually was best for you." Stephanie sat silently, her eyes moving between us, clearly wanting to mediate but respecting that this was a conversation Mom and I needed to have directly. "And I never properly acknowledged everything you've done for this family," Mom continued. "The financial support, taking care of us after your father died. I told myself it was what any son would do, but the truth is, it was extraordinary. You've been extraordinary, Ellis, and I was too blind to see it." The words I'd waited decades to hear hung in the air between us. Part of me wanted to grab onto them, to finally bask in the maternal approval I'd craved for so long. But another part, the part that had been working with Dr. Harrison, recognized that my healing couldn't depend on Mom's validation. "Thank you for saying that," I said carefully. "It means a lot to hear it. But I need you to understand something, Mom. I'm not the same person who left that graduation party 2 months ago. I've been working through a lot of things, and I've realized that I can't keep seeking your approval as the measure of my worth. I need to define success on my own terms." "I understand," she said, though her slight frown suggested she was still processing this new, more assertive version of me. "If we're going to have a relationship going forward, it needs to be based on mutual respect," I continued. "I need you to see me, really see me, for who I am, not who you wished I would be." "I want to try," she said, and I believed her. "I don't want to lose you, Ellis. You and Stephanie are all I have left." "You're not going to lose me," I assured her, "but things are going to be different." For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was talking to my mother, as an equal, not as the disappointing son or the financial provider, but as one adult to another. It wasn't a perfect conversation, and I knew we had many more difficult discussions ahead of us, but it was a start. As we finished dinner, Mom brought out an old photo album I hadn't seen in years. "I found this when I was cleaning out the attic last week," she explained, opening it to reveal pictures from my childhood. There I was at 8 years old, proudly holding up a computer circuit board I'd taken apart and reassembled. In another photo, I was showing Dad a program I'd written on our ancient family computer. Page after page documented moments of curiosity, creativity, and determination that I'd forgotten, and that I'd never realized Mom had bothered to capture. "You always had your own path," she said softly. "I just didn't have the wisdom to recognize where it was leading." As we looked through the photos together, Stephanie occasionally adding her own memories, I felt something shift inside me. Not a complete healing of old wounds, but the beginning of a new understanding. The future of our family relationship remained uncertain, but for the first time in decades, I felt hopeful about its possibilities. 6 months after the graduation party incident, I hosted a company celebration at our newly expanded headquarters. We had just secured a major government contract that would increase our revenue by 40% and allow us to hire 20 new employees. It was a significant milestone, worthy of recognition. After some deliberation, I decided to invite Mom and Stephanie. Not because I needed their validation, but because I wanted to share this part of my life with them, something I had kept separate for too long. "Are you sure you want us there?" Stephanie asked when I called with the invitation. "It's your moment, Ellis. You deserve to enjoy it without any family tension." "I'm sure," I said. "Besides, I think Mom might actually enjoy seeing what I do all day. And Troy is welcome to come too, if he wants." On the night of the celebration, I felt a strange nervousness as I waited for my family to arrive. The venue looked impressive. Our renovated office space decorated with subtle elegance, catering stations offering gourmet food, and an open bar serving craft cocktails. My employees mingled with clients and industry partners, the buzz of conversation and occasional laughter creating an atmosphere of success and camaraderie. When Mom walked in with Stephanie and Troy, I watched her eyes widen as she took in the scene. This wasn't a small computer repair shop. This was a legitimate enterprise with significant influence in the tech world. I greeted them warmly, introduced them to my executive team, and gave them a tour of the facility. "This is all yours?" Mom asked as we walked through the development floor, where programmers worked at ergonomic workstations surrounded by multiple monitors. "You built all of this?" "From the ground up," I confirmed. "Started with just me in a garage. Now we're approaching 50 employees and clients in 7 countries. "It's remarkable, Ellis," she said, and I could hear the genuine awe in her voice. I had no idea. "I mean, I knew you were successful, but this is beyond anything I imagined." As the evening progressed, I was called to the front of the room to make a speech. Standing before the gathered crowd, I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with external validation and everything to do with recognizing my own journey. 10 years ago, I started this company with nothing but determination and a specific vision, I began. Most people, including some in my own family, I smiled slightly in Mom's direction, keeping my tone light, thought I was taking an unnecessary risk. Why not go the traditional route? Get a degree, climb the corporate ladder, follow the established path to success. I paused, looking around at the team we'd built, the space we'd created. But I've always believed that there are many paths to success, many ways to contribute value to the world. Some of us thrive in traditional academic environments. Others, like me, need to forge our own way. The important thing isn't which path you take. It's that you stay true to your own strengths, your own vision, your own definition of what matters. After the speech, as guests returned to mingling, Mom approached me with an uncharacteristic hesitancy. "Ellis, I need to say something, and I want you to really hear me this time." I nodded, giving her my full attention. "I was wrong," she said simply. "Wrong about you, wrong about what success looks like, wrong about so many things. Seeing all of this," she gestured around the room, "makes me realize how narrow my vision has been. But more than that, seeing how these people respect you, how they look to you for leadership. I'm not just impressed by what you've built, Ellis. I'm proud of the man you've become, truly proud." The words I'd waited a lifetime to hear, delivered not in the reluctant, qualified way of our previous conversations, but with genuine sincerity. Yet to my surprise, while I appreciated hearing them, I no longer needed them the way I once had. "Thank you, Mom," I said, meaning it. "That means a lot to me." Later that evening, After most of the guests had departed, I found myself standing by the window in my office with Stephanie, looking out at the city lights. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I always thought I was the lucky one in our family. Good at school, mom's favorite, scholarships, clear path forward. But watching you tonight, I realized something." "What's that?" I asked, curious. "You're the one who's truly free," she said. "You defined success on your own terms. You built something that's uniquely yours. You didn't let other people's expectations or limitations define you." She looked at me with a new respect. "That takes a kind of courage I'm not sure I have." "You have it," I assured her. "You just haven't needed to use it in the same way." She smiled. "Maybe. But I'm learning from you, big brother, about standing up for myself, about defining my own path." I turned down the Princeton PhD offer, by the way. "You did? Why?" "That was your top choice." "It was Mom's top choice," she corrected. "I'm actually more interested in applying my research in the private sector. The work I'm doing at the biotech firm feels more immediate, more tangible. I can see the impact in real time." I smiled, recognizing the spark of someone discovering their authentic path. "Well, if you ever need advice on navigating the corporate world, you know who to call." "I do," she agreed. "And Ellis, no matter what happens with Mom, with our family dynamics, I want you to know that I see you. I've always seen you. And I'm not just proud to be your sister. I'm grateful for everything you've taught me, whether you meant to or not." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The painful confrontation at Stephanie's graduation party had been a breaking point, but also a breakthrough. It had forced issues to the surface that had been simmering for decades, creating space for honest conversation and genuine change. My relationship with Mom was still evolving, still fragile in some ways. She was trying, really trying, to see me as I am rather than as she had always perceived me, and I was learning to accept her efforts without expecting perfection, to appreciate the progress without dwelling on the past. But the most profound changes had happened within me. Through therapy, reflection, and standing my ground, I had finally internalized a truth that had eluded me for most of my life. My value was not determined by anyone else's assessment, not Mom's approval, not academic credentials, not even the external markers of business success. My worth came from being authentically myself, from living according to my own values, from creating a life that had meaning on my own terms. Sometimes the most important battle we fight isn't against others, but against the stories we've been told about ourselves, and the ones we've come to believe. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply refusing to play a role that doesn't fit, to stand up and say, "This is who I am, this is what I've built, this is the life I've chosen, and it is enough." That realization didn't erase the pain of the past or magically repair complex family dynamics. But it gave me the foundation to build something new, a life where I was no longer seeking validation from sources that couldn't or wouldn't provide it, where I was free to define success in ways that aligned with my true self. And that, I discovered, was the most valuable achievement of all. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family expectations or redefine success on your own terms? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and finding your own path. Thanks for listening. And remember, your worth isn't defined by others' perceptions. It's defined by the courage to be authentically yourself.